Hi, my name is Vashti Harrison, and I'm an author and illustrator of children's books like Little Leaders, Bold Women, and Black History. I've also illustrated books like Hair Love and Sulway. A lot of my work is for and about Black children, and one thing I've really tried to incorporate into all of my illustration are sweet and innocent characters that we can fall in love with and want to go on adventures with and root for. And that's definitely what I've tried to incorporate into my new book, Big, my first piece of fiction, my first picture book. Big tells the story of a little girl who's experiencing some really big feelings about her body and follows her on a journey towards self love where she can reclaim her own narrative. It explores some very real challenges that many young Black girls are facing, including adultification and anti fat bias.
Welcome to the Picture Booking Podcast. My name is Nick Patton, and I'm honored to introduce today's host, Shawna J. Tenney. Enjoy!
Vashti, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm so excited to talk about your new book, Big. I think I saw like a kind of a book trailer promotion thing you did on it, and I was just like, oh, I want to talk about that book. So I'm really excited. I love the message of this book, including like learning to love yourself for who you are and, making the decision to not let others define you. Mm-hmm. Can you tell our audience a little bit about this book?
For sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan, and your podcasts in the past have been so helpful for me on my journey towards becoming a children's book author and illustrator. And, I felt like armed with the tools that I needed to embark on this career because of things I learned in your podcast. So I really, really appreciate what you do, and I'm honored that I get to talk about my book with you.
Thank you so much. That really means a lot to me.
So Big is a lot of things. It follows the story of a little girl who she doesn't have a name because I wanted this book to feel a little bit more universal. It's not specifically my story or any one person's story, but she has an incident on the playground where, she's doing something that like her and her friends are doing, and maybe they're a little older than they should be messing around. They're doing what kids do. They mess around and they break things, and she gets in trouble for it. And an adult, one of the teachers, says something to her. Don't you think you're too big for that? And the words kind of fly off the page and kind of impact her in an intense way. And some of the words that, she hears from kids on the playground, they start sticking to her. And I really wanted to explore this feeling of what it feels like to be that kid, to be judged by other people's words, and really what it feels like to walk around the world with other people's labels on you. So it's really internal. We spend the entire book fully within her perspective, and she starts to feel like kind of boxed in by other people's definitions of her, about her body and about the way she looks. And she has to break free from that. And so while we spend so much time kind of quietly in her mind, her journey towards self-love, it's kind of subtle, but if I hope that it feels really powerful in the end, because I tried to use the idea of a picture book in this sort of meta way. So at one point she is kind of boxed in by the trim size of the book, and she's literally holding words, and she does something that I think is really powerful with the words at the end that I think could be, maybe a model or a guide for people on how to let go of the things that are not helpful for you and hold on to the things that you know about yourself and to be true. I think that's like a little esoteric, but I hope it all comes clear when you actually see the images, because I, as a person who likes to draw, I tried to put more story into the images than the words. So I hope that it all comes through together.
It really does. And I really do think it is powerful. Like, I connected with this book because I was like always the tallest person in my class.
Mm-hmm.
And that word adultification that you used,
Yeah.
that was like a real thing for me. Like I was, like 5, 6 in seventh grade, when everybody else was way smaller than
Mm-hmm.
me. I was like looking over the heads of everyone. I also connected because I danced ballet, and
Mm.
I had a ballet teacher that said, "You're too tall to be a professional ballerina."
Oh,
And I got stuck in the back like this little girl does in this book.
no.
So
Oh,
I really connected with it. And, um, you know, adults expecting kids that are, not, they're bigger or taller, expecting them to act a different way because they don't look like children like small, tiny, cute children anymore, type
yeah.
thing.
And I think the interesting and important thing about it is that, like, it is a bias. It is a thing that happens in our society, adultification bias.
Mm-hmm.
It's a belief that some children are just more adult, more mature, like more responsible, more knowledgeable, like they should know better, or than their
Yeah.
age would suggest. And it it has, like, sometimes traumatic results. It, in the case specifically with Black girls, that I read this study that came from the Georgetown Law Center on Poverty and Inequality, and it specifically spoke to facing harsher punishment just because an adult viewed that child as maybe, um, no, they should know better.
Yeah.
But you can see it all across our society. And I think the thing with biases, sometimes they're implicit and sometimes they're explicit, but the thing about them is we have to challenge our own biases to get rid of them. So it's like active work. And so, as much as this is a book for kids, I hope that it speaks to adults and encourages them to really think about how they're talking to young people, because you're a kid and you want to play around, you want to dance, and no one should dim that light from you. No one should take that away from you.
Yeah. Um, there was a lot of there's a lot of characters in this book that are kind of giving well-meaning advice.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about that. The well-meaning advice.
Yeah. Those were some of the easiest lines to write,
Mm-hmm.
because, I just had to kind of look to some of the people in my life who, you know, I know thought that they were giving me helpful advice, but it either hurt my feelings or ended up just being harmful. Um, and I think that that's like a really complicated thing to address with adults, at least for the people in my life. Like, I got told I was too sensitive for listening to the words that they were saying to me. Um,
Wow.
so it's sort of like this interesting, like, you know, harshness that is not intended to be harsh. And I think that that's something that happens. I think that's something that happens with adults when they say things that are, sometimes unkind or unhelpful. And our feelings get hurt, or, children's feelings get hurt. In the end, we're expected to prioritize the intent of their words rather than the result of them. And often the people who are on, the harsher end of that are children. And so I wanted to make a book that really focused on, the experience and the feelings of that child. And so, there's a part in the book where she, confronts the people who have said on some unkind things to her. And then afterwards, some people are just like, okay, I don't get it. Or like,
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't, like, maybe you're just being a little too sensitive. And, and my point in that is showing that, you know, at the end of the day, some people are never going to be able to, um, admit or acknowledge something that they have said had negative results because they don't believe that the intent was negative. Like, they think, I didn't mean to hurt you, so I couldn't have hurt you. Um,
Mm.
and so I wanted to offer a story that goes beyond that and shows that this child can get to this place of self-love despite the fact that these people have not acknowledged what they said to her. She's returned the unkind words to them, but she doesn't need them to apologize because she knows what's true about her and she's held on to what she knows about herself. um, so yeah, I think a lot of that is definitely pulled directly from my life. But again, like, I've illustrated the people in this sort of like tonal way. Like everything
Yeah.
that we're viewing is fully with from the girl's perspective. So she's the only person that's fully rendered in the book, and everyone is kind of a hue and a shade um, of this tonal pink. And
Yeah.
in that way, there's sort of like, for me, the ideas of people, representations of people rather than specific people.
Yeah. Yeah. I really liked how you did that. And the things you are talking about, I think this book can be so empowering to, you know, to so many children who are going through something like this where people are maybe giving them well-meaning advice, but it's actually really hurtful, and how you can see the girl can, choose to not let the other people define them.
Right.
And you talked about how like this is connected to your life. So talk to us a little bit more about that. Like how did this idea come about? Like what were the kind of things that helped you write the story?
So yeah, this is my first piece of fiction, and everything else that I've done in the past, at least that I've written, has been um, nonfiction, short stories based on other people's lives. So I had, a very clear starting point and a really clear goal of sharing information with young people in the form of the Little Leaders, Little Dreamers, and Little Legends books. And so it seems like kind of a crazy jump to go straight to something totally different. But I think this idea of um, adultification bias, it came from reading this study that came from the Georgetown Law Center on Poverty and Inequality. And in that study, it said that, at the beginning of the study, it says that Black girls as young as the age of 5 are viewed as less innocent and more adult than their white counterparts. And that's not just from Black or white adults, it's like all across the board. So it's like it's a bias that's inherent in our society. And so it results in them receiving less nurturing and less care, people believing that they are more mature than they are. It ends up with them facing harsher punishment. And I read that study when it came out, and it was right around the time that my first book, Little Leaders, was coming out. And while I was working on it, and I really wanted to infuse this idea of like really sweet children characters. I wanted to create Black kid characters that looked so charming. They popped off the page, and when you saw them, you just said like, I want to hug them. I wanted to create a character. Like, I had just been to London, and there was an exhibition of Winnie the Pooh at the Victoria and Albert Museum, and I was like, I actually didn't even get to see it. It was like opening right after I left, and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to see it. I love Winnie the Pooh. People love Winnie the Pooh. I wanted to create a character that evoked that from people, that feeling of, oh my gosh, I love him. I want to hug him. And I wondered, like, could I do that with little Black kid characters? After I'd read this study, it broke my heart that these biases exist in our culture, and I just wanted to make things that reminded people that all kids are kids and are deserving of that love and that nurturing. And so that's something that's been part of my work. I definitely, with Little Leaders, those books, I really could have drawn each of those famous people I was writing about to look like themselves, but I wanted to create a kid character. It sort of looks like they're dressing up as these famous people, and make them in this really sweet way. And I tried to incorporate that I guess, goal into all of my other illustration work, like Sulway and Hair Love and Hello Star. But that question of nurturing and innocence was really kind of at the front of my mind for the longest time, and I knew that I wanted to focus on that in my first piece of fiction. I always knew that I wanted to get to a place where I was writing my own work. And I definitely couldn't have guessed that I would have started my career as a person who was writing historical biographies. But I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about writing through that process. And so this, to me, it is like a natural progression in that path of creating works that remind people of the innocence of children. And, like another metric of this adultification bias is, body. Is that child tall, or are they bigger than the other kids? And what does that result in their treatment? So, I had that goal in my mind. And I also, had a lot of these feelings that sort of were left unresolved from my childhood. So, Big is inspired by so many things, but it's definitely inspired partially by my own childhood, my own relationship to my body, and that sort of internal journey that, I think I'm still on this really tough journey towards self-love. Growing up in the 90s, it was really hard to sort of navigate the world when everything is dominated by like fashion models and diet culture, and it's really hard to make it through a time like that, or any time like that, honestly, in in America. Even, especially now too. So all of these things were sort of unresolved, but they all came together, and I worried that, like, I wasn't sure that a children's book was the right place to explore these things, because I'm an adult and I'm still struggling with these things. I'm an adult and I still haven't figured out, how to love my body. But so I wondered, like, is this a too adult journey to share in this children's book? But, I really wanted to focus on a story that showed a child who starts in this place of self-love, because all children start in this place. No child is born, insecure or hating their body. And, when we talk about kids, we say things like, "Oh my gosh, you're such a big girl. You're a big girl now." And that's a good thing. And somewhere along the way that changes. Big becomes bad. Big is a problem and undesirable. And I wanted to show this kid reclaiming that and showing us that, like, big and kind and graceful can all be a part of the person you become.
Yeah, I love it. So this was your first picture book to write. Is that correct? So tell me, was it hard to write a picture book, or what was your process like? Like, did you start with pictures or with words, or tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I definitely start with sketching. I usually come up with story ideas from drawing out a character or different scenarios. And I started this idea for a picture book with a sketch of a character of this little girl, sort of kind of boxed in, like, which is something that we see kind of in the latter half of the book. But I really wanted to kind of capture that feeling of what it felt like to be a little kid, and really just the emotions are so full and you don't know what to do with them. And that can feel like a really lost and hopeless place. And so, I was like, oh, this might be too sad for a kid's book. But I wanted to show, like, there are ways out of it. You can make more space for yourself. You don't have to be boxed in by other people's definitions of you or their ideas of you. Those few drawings I started with were the spark of the story. And at first, I really hoped that I could make a wordless picture book. I feel like I don't express myself the best through words. Like I have really long answers because I don't know how to like edit myself, or I just like don't say anything at all. And so when the book was like in its earliest stages, it had not enough information in the images and not enough information in the text. And I think I in my goal to make it wordless, I realized I would have to add a lot more panels of action to really show what was happening. And I didn't want it to kind of function in that way. I wanted it to feel really kind of slower than that, softer than that, so that you could kind of sit in these moments. So I slowly started adding in words. And at a certain point, I was working really closely with my editor, and she really encouraged me to add more text so that, you know, if someone were just to listen to the story, they would be able to follow it. If they couldn't see the images, would they know what was happening? And so it was sort of like this game of Sudoku of like adding in words. Oh, but we have to take out one word here because it's already later on. So we're just moving things around, and it kind of shifted things so drastically. So it was complicated. I really couldn't have done it without an editor, someone who was really, really good at that. And Farron Jacobs, my editor, was so amazing and worked with me like super closely on each thing.
That's
but
great.
yeah, it was complicated. And like, you know, again, I questioned myself throughout the whole thing. I think that's the definitely huge difference for me in working with other people, illustrating other people's books, or even writing, you know, Little Leaders, which is like other people's stories. I'm just, you know, translating them essentially. But like writing my own piece of fiction and illustrating it, I just like kept questioning and taking things out and adding it back in. And I just never knew when it would feel right.
Yeah. Well, where you ended up is beautiful. So
Thank you.
okay, let's talk about the illustrations a little bit more.
Sure.
So you have a background in film, correct? And TV?
Yes.
So tell us about how things you've learned in film have helped your illustrations, and particularly some of the techniques that helped you tell this story, as far as like maybe the colors or the camera angles or the close-up, far away things, stuff like that.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about me being an illustrator is that I never planned to be an illustrator. I like to draw a lot as a kid, but I stopped drawing when I got to college and later on grad school. And amazingly, I found my way into art making. I found my way into film. I made experimental films. And the thing that was so exciting about that for me was I really learned how to express myself and make meaning with my art making, because when I was a kid, drawing for me was just like copying things. I would sit in front of the TV and copy characters. I would copy you know, fashion models from magazines and stuff. So I was really grateful for my time in undergrad, where I was like, you know, I went to a really big university, and there was not a big art department, but I had this small kind of cohort of people who were interested in weird films. And that really kind of challenged me as a young person to just make art in a different way. And so I went to grad school to study experimental film. And the school I went to was Cal Arts, and people know Cal Arts is like the Disney school of animation. And I was paying like a buttload to go there. So I was like, I am absolutely going to take classes in every single department at this school. And it wasn't until my final year, my third year of grad school, and I was like deep in my thesis editing, I was like, I'm going to take a drawing class in the animation department just for fun. And turns out it was not fun. I could not stop thinking about it all the time because I was not good at drawing anymore. This thing that I knew about myself from childhood was like, I'm a good drawer. I'm the best drawer in the room. Not at Cal Arts, I was not. And then clearly I hadn't drawn in like at least 5 years, and I was rusty. So it was really apparent to me, like, if you don't practice something, you're not going to be good. So I finished grad school and I started working in film and TV. and I just made it a goal of mine to draw every day. And the thing that I was, grateful for was I was able to approach drawing from a storytelling perspective, and all of that I learned from making movies for a few years, and um, that I think was, an incredible boost to my art making, because this tool that I have access to now, or I'd forgotten I had access to, I can use to tell more stories that I couldn't tell in film. And so, my first picture book that I illustrated was called Festival of Colors, about these little kids collecting flowers to make powder for the holy festival, where they're going to throw all these beautiful colors around. And I really was like, oh, I'm going to make this like a movie. We're going to have high angles, we're going to have low angles. There's a lot of like repetition in that book. It was like, we picked yellow flowers to make yellow, we picked blue flowers to make blue, we picked red flowers to make red. So it was like, the interesting thing I can do here to break up that repetition is treat the camera very differently, the metaphorical camera, and approach each image from different angles and perspectives. So that was something that I hoped I could, can maybe make my work stand out a little bit more. And throughout the years of working on other picture books, I think it's just become just kind of second nature. I never thought of myself as like the best like storyboarder. Like, I think I have a great eye when I look through the camera, and understanding composition when I'm setting things up. When I'm just choosing from my own brain, I tend to create like pretty standard camera perspective. So I do have to push myself to go outside of the box there. But I think when thinking about this book, I really tried to, treat it like I was this visual development artist working at like an animation studio. Like, so I tried to create like a color script, and think about how I can use color to help push the story forward, and create these more dramatic elements of narrative. I tried to think about these really quiet moments, and how we can still stay really internal in the story. But there's not a lot of interesting sort of perspectives in this one. But I did try to, really showcase something that felt soft and internal, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's a little bit harder. If you were to do that with a movie, I think you would end up with like a lot of that, like, I don't know, those blurry scenes when like Sabrina the Teenage Witch is going into her dream sequence. Like, I don't know if I would have done that, but I was looking at other things. Like, I was looking at Degas paintings. I was looking at there's like a Mary Blair sequence that she had sketched out, like done visual development for in Fantasia. There was like a potential scene with babies dancing ballet, and her sketches are in pastel, and they're so soft. So I was looking at other artists for inspiration on how to make something that felt kind of dreamy, and quiet and internal.
Yeah. And you even mentioned this kind of in the back matter. Let's see. That you use pink to like symbolize kind of the innocence and the joy and the playfulness and the happiness. And then at one point, there's a character that kind of forces her to wear a gray color. Tell us about that decision.
Yeah, that's probably like one of the weirdest, like, like more experimental parts in the story. But I really wanted this image of this teacher or this adult in this person's life, like offering that sort of like unsolicited advice, with, quote unquote, the best intentions, trying to help this kid out. And, for me, that was sort of representative of this feeling of, family members of mine telling me like, oh, well, you should wear these kinds of colors because these are slimming colors. And whereas pink represents the innocence of this child, the teacher essentially like taking that away from her, or the dancer instructor taking that away from her, is sort of stripping her of that innocence. And while she's got the best of intentions, it's representative of this thing that we often do to kids because we feel uncomfortable with what they're wearing. Like, oh, well, that kid's too big to wear that. She's a big girl now. She's too big to wear that. Like, I never want to be a part of taking that, joy away from a kid, just because of assumptions that I've made about how old she is or, what she looks like.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like, it's kind of a weird scene, but it is like, a metaphor for that idea. I remember, being a kid who, like, I didn't fit a lot of the clothes in the kids section when I was little. And so I would have to wear more adult clothes. And I think that is very true for a lot of kids. I mean, thankfully, there are a lot more, diversity in sizes and options for kids these days. But, I've seen so many stories of people who've had to, wear essentially adult clothes when they were kids because there was not inclusive sizing in the kids department. Yep. And, that's just like, that's another way of dimming this child's light. So, yeah, I hope that is sort of like interesting and not so weird in the scene.
No, I feel like it, like, it really, like, and she wears that gray when she's just feeling like sad and boxed in. And then she eventually pushes out of that, and her clothing eventually comes more pink again. And I think that really shows us those emotions and showing that she's choosing to love herself despite what other people say. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I've tried to do since my earliest of books is try to like find a color that represents a character. I remember like trying to think really actively about that when I illustrated this book, Cece Loves Science. I chose one specific color for Cece, and then the direct complement to that color is what her best friend is always dressed in, and everything else is like cohesive and part of her color palette in her world. And so I started with that single color for the main character in Big, and it's sort of like, for me, it's representative of the person that she's going to become, and she's, as any kid deserves the time to figure out who you are, what you like. So we see brief versions of this fully saturated color right at the beginning of the book, and then we don't see it again until the end of the book because I want it to be representative of her future and her options and her potential.
Yeah, it's so powerful what colors can do. For sure. I want to go back a little bit because you were talking a little bit about your going to school for film, and I want to learn how you broke into publishing and how that kind of started.
Yeah, so after grad school, I bounced around a lot. I worked so briefly. I don't know how I did this. I weaseled my way into working as a graphic designer for a t-shirt company for a minute. And then I got an opportunity to work in TV, and I was driving from Santa Clarita, from Valencia, where CalArts is, to Venice Beach. It was like 2 hours of traffic every morning to work as a production coordinator at this visual effects studio. And I had lots of time to contemplate life in those 2 hours of traffic. And fortunately, I did not stay there that long because I felt like this wasn't the right thing for me, but I was desperate to, do the thing of like get a job in the field in which you have your degree. So I was desperate to just have a job no matter what. I think, other of my like cohort were, they just wanted to make art and were happy to go back to, wherever they had come from, or just stay in the area and just create their films. And I was just like, I want that, but I need to have a full-time job. And I think that came from this fear of like, my parents are a little bit older, and it's that very traditional in that, like, you need to get a job. And I was like, okay, my metric for success is now is having a career, a day of like a full-time day job. And then my art will be my thing that I do when I'm free. And so I think I had put these really intense pressures on myself. And through CalArts, had like an opportunity to meet a recruiter from Bento Box Animation, and asked me, I think she had put me up for a job on like Bob's Burgers. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is amazing. And it fell through. And I kept working at the graphic design studio, and I showed my film at film festivals, and I was, by all means, successful as a filmmaker. And then I got word that there was an opportunity at Bento Box Atlanta. And do I want to move to Atlanta to be a production coordinator on this animated TV series? And I said yes. It felt like scary to do this, but like at the time, all of those Marvel movies were being shot in Atlanta. I thought I was like ahead of the curve. I thought I was going to be doing something like meaningful, and like I was going to be part of this community of filmmakers. So I moved to Atlanta. I worked on this animated TV show, and the hours were really long. And as a production coordinator, I was not doing anything creative. The most creative part of my day was adding colors to the spreadsheet that navigated everyone's work schedules. My job was to like make the schedule for the animators. I worked in the animation department. And so like I would watch like the animatic for an episode and make lists and do all these calculations and make everyone's assignments. And so like I spent so much time I think just managing other people's art making, that I felt so left out. I felt so sad. Like, I just want to be an artist. I don't know how, I don't know where or when, but I don't know. At that point, I had still been drawing every day. I kept it a secret from my coworkers, and I would just go home at night. And I would stay up really late. I think there's a word for this when you're like just desperate to reclaim your own free time, that I would just force myself to stay up till like 3:00 in the morning drawing, because my like 10-hour work days were just so uncreative. And I would listen to podcasts while I was at my desk, one of them being yours and others about like art and like visual development. But I had heard about SCBWI because like in nearly every episode of one of your podcasts, you would mention this thing, SCBWI. And I would be like, oh man, well, I can't illustrate children's books. I can do like one-off drawings, but I can't illustrate a whole book. But that like information was ingrained in my mind. And so when the season ended, everyone got laid off, and we didn't know if the show was going to get picked up for another season. So I was sort of left with this feeling of like, okay, what am I going to do next? Do I try to get on another show in Atlanta? My roommate at the time was working on the Vampire Diaries, and like I couldn't even get like a PA role. I was like, I'm a production coordinator. I can't even start from the bottom. It was like not the like film community I thought it was. I very much felt like the film community was still in LA, and everyone was just sort of like working in Atlanta, but like, I don't know. So I was just kind of at a loss, and I had a short break where I had been accepted into this film festival film market where I was going to pitch a movie, and the whole thing went so poorly. I met like a lot of incredible people, and I felt like my pitching skills got so good, but no one could understand what I was talking about, because I was pitching like kind of an experimental documentary, and these guys were just like straight up narrative filmmakers, and they were just like, I don't know, I don't get it. You're never going to get funding for that. You're never going to make that movie. And I was like, okay, well, joke's on you, because I'm just going to go and make art forever. So I stopped looking for I did not stop looking for other work, but I did not go back to Atlanta. I did not go and try to make that documentary. I was like, I'm going to focus on illustration. I think I can, I can get commissions here and there. It was paying a decent amount. And so I just got rejected from a ton of other jobs. Like, I won't bore you with that part, but I was desperate to like have another day job. And I thought, well, maybe book publishing, or, maybe I can, go back to LA. But fast forward, I like got rejected from a ton of things, had one job offer and then another job offer. They came in at the same time and they both rescinded their offers. And I was like, no, oh God. And I was like, okay, all right. This is it. The only thing that I feel excited about right now is illustrating. So I'm going to move back home to my small town in Virginia and just try to be an illustrator. And if I'm going to take that seriously, then I guess I need to take children's book illustrating seriously. That's what I heard from Shawna. So I'm going to join this thing called SCBWI. And I did. I think the thing that had stopped me before is like, the barrier for entry was a little high. Like, I didn't know if I wanted to spend, I think it was like $100 for a membership. And at that point I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. This is me taking an active role in making this career happen. And moving back to Virginia, where I grew up, meant very little access to anything. Like, there are so few jobs there. It's super rural. And like, we only got like high speed internet like in 2014. Like, it was that rural. So the only thing I really had access to was the internet and nothing else. So I was like, I'm going to post on social media all the time. I'm really going to take this seriously. I'm going to be more public about it. I'm going to put my name on my social media account, and just join SBWI, listen to all of their podcasts, read all of their literature about what it means to join the industry. They have this book called The Book that's like got all the information in it. And they had like a monthly drawing challenge, like essentially like a draw this in your style, but they offered a prompt and you draw an image, and if you win, your illustration gets placed in the monthly newsletter. And the thing about SCBWI is like, it's kind of like one of the only like industry or community organizations. So a good amount of editors and art directors get their emails. So I was like, okay, I'm going to take this seriously. In May of 2016, or in April of 2016, I officially moved home with my parents. In May of 2016, I joined SCBWI and submitted a drawing to their monthly drawing challenge. And on June 1st, I opened up my email and I saw my drawing there, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, like, this feels like so good. This feels like the validation I was looking for.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, this is a sign. This is good. I'm doing the right thing. The next day, June 2nd, I got an email from an art director offering me the opportunity to illustrate a picture book. And I was like,
oh, wow.
oh, okay, wait a second. Whoa, slow down. I know I said I wanted this, but this is maybe a little too fast. I'm not ready for this. But I was like, I'm terrified, but I'm going to say yes, because I'm not going to stay here with my parents forever. And honestly, the offer was like maybe the lowest advance I'd ever been offered, I mean, in my illustration career when I look back on it now, but it was the most money I'd ever been offered up to that point. And I was like, whoa, there's a lot more money in this than I realized. So financially speaking, business wise, I was like, okay, this is right. I have to do this, even though I'm terrified. So yeah, that ended up being Festival of Colors. I think, like, as much as like artistically it was the path that I wanted to go down, I tried to treat everything as like business minded as possible. So I was doing a lot of research on like what books are on the market, and what styles are out there, how can I make my work stand out from everybody else's work, and again, I was like, I can't stay with my parents forever.
Yeah.
They were happy to have me. And I know it's a huge privilege to even just say, I'm not going to look for other work and just do this full time. Um, but, you know, from my perspective as like a kid, essentially, I was like, I made it out of my small town. I went all the way to Hollywood and now I'm back. And so I felt like very insecure. So that was a very long version of that story. I'm so sorry, but that is how I got into illustration. So that deal happened in June of 2016. In like August, I went to like an SCBWI like community workshop, and I started kind of getting feedback from other people. And then that winter or fall in October of 2016, I went to my regional conference, and I had heard that everybody in children's books, every illustrator makes postcards, right? They do these things to send to art directors so people can see their work. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to make a postcard. I'm going to make a little booklet of my work because I want to stand out. And I think something that I had seen going into that conference in the summertime was like, one, I was the youngest person in the room, and two, I was the only person of color in the room. So I thought I had a lot to think about going into the next conference in October. And I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to make sure everybody sees me and meets me. And I hate that. Like, I'm not a very good, like, in crowds and, you know, networking, but I was like, you know, I have to make the most out of this. I spent the money to come here, so I'm going to make sure everyone sees me, meets me, and sees my art. So every person that was like teaching a workshop, I made sure to like talk to and give them my little booklet of my work. And the very end of the conference, the last person I was talking to, like I didn't even really imagine that she was interested in talking to me, but I had heard someone who was standing next to me, like, and they were like, "Oh my God, is that Carrie Hannigan? She's an Asian. I really want to talk to her." And I was like, "Well, come on, let's go talk to her." What the heck, you know, we're at the end of this. You got to go talk to her. And so I kind of like moved over and we're like, "Yeah, meet this person. They really wanted to talk to you." And then they did. And she was like, she was listening to me tell someone about my little booklet. And she was like, "Can I have one?" And that was it. It was the end of the day. And I went home, and the next day, or that Monday, I got an email from Carrie asking if I wanted representation because she had seen my work and really liked it. And that's how I got an agent. And, you know, that was October of 2016. In November, I moved to New York. I had the opportunity to sublet from somebody, and I was like, okay, great. I'm out of Virginia, and I'm going to, you know, be closer to the publishing industry and really get things going. With Carrie, I'd gotten this 2-book deal for CC Love Science, and that was like in November, December. And then in February, I had the idea for Little Leaders. So it all happened really, really, really fast. And so, you know, looking back on it now, I mean, it feels like a Cinderella story, but I also felt like in the following year, because everything happened so fast, I said yes to so many things because I was so sure, like, you know, my carriage was going to turn back into a pumpkin and I just need to, you know, make the most out of this while I've got it. So that meant that I did like 4 books in a year. I really burnt myself out.
Wow.
So I'm only kind of just coming out of what was a really intense couple of years.
Yeah. Well, you say it's a Cinderella story, but like hearing your whole story, you were putting in the work before that, like drawing on your own. And then you were listening to podcasts, you were starting to learn things, and then it sounds like you put in a lot of like research when you started learning about the industry, and so you were doing the work. It didn't just happen, you know. So and even like learning your films, that was like part of your whole learning process. So you put in the work, and that's the
Yeah.
that's the way to do it, you know. So
for sure. And, you know, when people do ask me about it, I always tell them, like, you know, for me, the stakes were so high. And I think I don't know if anyone else was making my stakes so high. They just felt really high for me, and so I tried to be as business minded as possible. I was like, I wanted to set up a life for myself where I can be creative, because I had a taste of what it means to, like, just kind of have the job on paper and hope that creativity can come on the outside. And I knew that wouldn't work for me, for the kind
Yeah.
of person that I am. And so, yeah, I tried to be super strategic about what choices and, you know, people I met and places I went and how I used my time. And I, again, like, I forced myself to do things I wouldn't normally do, which is like be the networky person. And
Yeah, yeah. Yep, you got to force yourself to network for sure. So that was a good thing.
Fortunately, most people, nearly everybody in children's publishing is very nice, very sweet. So that helps.
Yeah. So we're getting close to our time now, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about you. I saw on social media that you have an upcoming book tour, and it's like a big book tour. So I wanted to know, like, some of your plans for that and what you hope comes out of that.
Yeah, it feels really, really incredible to be offered this opportunity. I've only ever gone on a book tour in the past as, part of a team, as someone who's the illustrator of the books. I haven't ever gone on a tour all alone, but my taste of it has definitely helped, because I know, like, what often happens is you'll kind of go from city to city. You'll only spend, a little bit of time at each school or at each bookstore. But, it's such an honor and like a treasure to be able to go meet kids across the country and listen to them and hear them talk about what they like and what they're interested in. Again, Big is a book that, like, I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing in writing this for kids, because it followed a story that, it came from my adult perspective of something that happened to me as a child, essentially, and I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing in making a kid's version out of it. So I am nervous about being able to talk to kids about something that took me a long time to process, but I hope to kind of give them the tools that they need to make space for themselves. So, I don't think of myself as the best, like, motivational speaker, but I do just want to chat with kids and draw with them. And that is always a treasure, to be able to just spend time with them. So,
Oh yeah.
the tour is always like, you spend some time at schools in the morning, and then you have a public event in the evening, which is nice. And you get to meet, the parents, people who want to buy your book. So, it's an honor. Not everyone gets to go on a book tour, and I don't take that lightly.
Yeah. That's so exciting. Yeah, and you're right. It's just so great to be with kids, because they really see the books in, like, such raw emotions, and they just express themselves and what they're feeling, and I'm sure it'll be just a great opportunity, and to draw with them, that will be so fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, kids will tell you when they don't like something, so you will learn to grow a thick skin.
It's true. Or they point things out that you never thought of,
That's true.
Which is fun. Let's I just want to end on one last question. What do you hope that parents and kids will experience as they read this book together?
Yeah, that's a good question. I really hope that people get a couple of things. I want Big to remind readers that all kids are deserving of nurturing and care, and that their presence is always important. I also hope that the book reminds readers about how powerful our words are, and it inspires people to kind of use their words to empower each other. One thing that, I've heard other people kind of describe the book as, like, about body positivity. And I do like to challenge that a little bit, because, positivity body positivity tends to like represent like your own feelings. It suggests like that it's just internal. It's just about how you're feeling and how you can change how you're feeling about the world. But, I don't want that to discredit, like, there are societal things, there are outside things, systemic and pervasive, discrimination and prejudice against people and their bodies, about their skin or the way they look. And so I would really like to challenge people to acknowledge their implicit biases, or just to stand up against them when they witness them, because it's affecting children. And I hope that everyone can work towards creating a space, a place where kids can be free to grow and change and still have the freedom to be kids.